Hi, everyone. My name is Adam Greenfield, and I'm very excited to welcome you tonight to a conversation with David Adjmi. I'm especially excited and honored to be speaking to not one, but two old and dear friends about some writing that I really love. So David Adjmi wrote a beautiful book, a memoir, and he's going to read a little bit from it with some help from the terrific Marin Ireland, a longtime collaborator of David's. And we'll get to that. But first, I want to just mention that, in normal times, Playwrights Horizons is located on 42nd Street, and we're very grateful to have a building that houses our work. But we also feel it's important to acknowledge, too, that the building that we call home is located on the island of Manhattan, Mannahatta. It's situated on land that is Lenape-Hoking, homeland of the Lenape. We pay respect to the Lenape peoples, the Lenape elders, and their ancestors, past, present, and future. As our theater's work and community extends beyond this island, we acknowledge that the Northeast is the homeland of many Indigenous nations. Playwrights Horizons pays respect to all Indigenous peoples who have stewarded this land throughout the generations and to their ongoing contributions culturally, intellectually, artistically, and spiritually. We'll be joined in a moment by David Adjmi. David Adjmi was called virtuosic by the New York Times, and he was named one of the top 10 in culture by the New Yorker in 2011. His newest play, Stereophonic, with music by Will Butler of Arcade Fire, will premiere on Broadway in spring 2021. His plays have been produced and developed by the Royal Shakespeare Company, Soho Rep, Lincoln Center, and developed at Steppenwolf and produced at Steppenwolf and many others. He was awarded a Mellon Foundation grant, the Guggenheim Fellowship, the Writing Writers Award, the Kesselring Prize for Drama, the Steinberg Playwright Award, McKnight and Jerome Fellowships, and the Bush Artist Fellowship, among many others. He is the recipient of residencies from the Dora Maar House, the American Academy of Rome, the Bogliasco Foundation, the McDowell Colony, Corporation of Yaddo, Gerasi, UCross, and others. We'll also be joined in a second by Marin Ireland. Marin's theater credits include Blue Ridge, Reasons to be Pretty, for which she won the Theater World Award and a Tony nomination, The Big Knife, and After Miss Julie, both also on Broadway. She was also in Ironbound, Kill Floor, in which I would add she was amazing, as well as Blasted and David Adjmi's Marie Antoinette. She was in Summer and Smoke, Three Sisters, and Cyclone, for which she won an Obie Award, among many other stage performances. Television and film work includes Light from Light, The Irishman, Sneaky Pete, Girls, Homeland, Masters of Sex, The Divide, The Slap, Sparrow's Dance, The Family Fang, 28 Hotel Rooms, In the Radiant City, Hell or High Water, Glass Chin, for which she received an Independent Spirit Award nomination, and Flint, in which she portrays activist Melissa Mays. So here's how this is going to go. Marin and David will read from an early section of David's book, Lot 6, a book that is now on sale at McNally Jackson, as well as many other purveyors of books. And then I'll ask some questions of them, and then they'll read from a later section of the book, and I'll ask some more questions, and then I'll take a look at some of the questions that you attendees have submitted and ask some of those, following which we'll all go eat dinner. So without any further ado, I want to introduce to you the great David Adjmi and the great Marin Ireland.
Hi.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hi, Marin.
Hi, David.
Thank you so much, Adam. Thank you for that. And thank you to everybody at Playwrights Horizons for making this possible and setting this up for us. I'm excited to do it. So basically, this book, it took me about 9 years to write it. I didn't know I was going to write a memoir. I was asked to do it and thought it would be an 18-month thing. And it turned out a lot longer, and it turned out to be a much deeper dive than I thought it was going to be. And the book sort of is structured a little bit like a Bildungsroman and almost like a Dickens novel. It starts out with me very young, and at the age of 8, and it ends when I'm, I think, in my late 30s. So it's a 30-year span. And it's, the first part is set in the Syrian Sephardic Jewish community in Midwood, which is a very insular, relatively small community that I'm from. And it's a fairly well-off group of people. My family wasn't super well off, so we were a little bit on the margins of the whole thing. And I had a kind of lonely childhood, but then I made a very good friend when I was 11 years old, and my loneliness was abated. And so now this part of the book that we're reading from is there's a little bit of a wrench in the works. So Marin and I are going to read it together in this semi-improvised thing that we are going to do.
And I'm going to disappear for a sec.
And he's going to disappear. All right, ready?
Ready. 5, 6, 7, 8. On the first day of 7th grade, Howie, without fanfare or flourish, arrived in school wearing a new shirt. The shirt was in the vein of abstract expression. It was patterned with stochastically arranged pinwheels, multicolored frets, and zigzags. It was collarless, somewhere between a sweatshirt and a sweater. I thought it was magnificent. He looked like a different person in the shirt. He'd lost a bit of weight, and with the combination of the shirt and his new slimmed down figure, Howie looked, for the first time since I'd known him, almost stylish. I hadn't seen this coming. I knew his wardrobe by heart, his every ecru sweater, his assembly line of beige slacks. So I was, if not hurt exactly, then somewhat stunned by this debut. He didn't share his new acquisition with me in advance, and I felt assaulted by the newness. Now that Howie had this pinwheel shirt, I felt a small crevasse open up, ever so slightly separating us. When I ran into him in the hall just before class, we made superficial conversation. I waited for him to call attention to his makeover, but he didn't say a word about it. He didn't ask what I thought of the shirt. He didn't ask me to tender my approval. I tried to feel happy for him for being fashionable and losing weight, though I dared not introduce either as a topic of conversation. I would feel too vulnerable congratulating him when he seemed quite patently not to need my congratulations. He blathered on about sugar-free brownies and tofutti ice cream, but I couldn't focus on what he was saying because of the shirt, because of the hidden registers of pain it tapped in me. I felt myself prowling for an advantage, some comparable treasure to flaunt in retaliation, but I owned nothing of value. I tried to hide my creeping envy. I tried slaloming around feelings that were invidious and unpleasant. I had a horrible summer, which was spent mainly without Howie, who'd been on vacation with his family, some dietetic spa in the Caribbean, while I'd been forced to go to a horrible Jewish day camp in Rockaway Beach. On weekends, my mother toted me to Deal to visit with Claudia Terzi or my Uncle Ralph, with the expectation that these visits would broaden my horizons and expose me to new friends who might break my bizarre attachment to Howie. We spent our days at the Deal Casino, a club with a private beach where my uncle was a member. Syrian girls in gold bikinis and gold makeup strode languidly down the row of beach umbrellas with anodized expressions, their wrists garlanded with bangles, hair straightened to the point of lamination. I saw boys from school shooting one another with water pistols, swimming with their tans and Speedos, their bodies lacquered with bain de soleil. They were all developing muscle, but I kept my shirt on, ashamed of my pale torso and flab. Mainly I'd be ignored, but sometimes the boys would pepper me with rhetorical questions. Things like, what are you doing here? And you go here? And why are you here? The questions implied that the Deal Casino was an inviolate sanctum, one I dirtied with my presence. Maybe everyone had some infrared capability, and there was some soiled, stained part of me I couldn't see. I tried to hide from the boys. I urged my uncle the following week to move to a different, less populated section of the beach, but the boys found me there too. Something changed that summer. There was a new ruthless curation, a reordering of existing hierarchies. I felt spotlit under some new and very harsh criteria. At school, Howie functioned as a buffer to social anxieties, but now I saw he could tire of my novelty. He could become fatigued by whatever abstract gifts I possessed. He could abandon me altogether. The pinwheel shirt seemed to herald something terrible. Would Howie become stylish? Would he supersede me? The fragile succession of these bleak thoughts led me to unspool in the middle of the hall.
Why do you look like you're going to cry?
Said Howie. I didn't sleep good last night, I said, trying to keep it together. I then noticed that the balled up Brillo pad of his hair had mysteriously unknotted itself into a sharply angled pillar of spikes. Your hair looks different,
My mother taught me how to burn my hair with a towel,
he said.
and I put mousse.
What's mousse?
Hair mousse. You never heard of Studio Mousse?
Maybe I heard of it, I said, but I hadn't. I felt so deficient. I hated the way he posed the question. How he stood with his hand on his hip. His posture seemed different, straighter. He seemed to have it all together. It was driving me crazy. Where did you get that shirt? I blurted, my voice involuntarily dipping into a register of hard accusation.
Lester's,
he said. And again, there was a slight glibness in his tone, like it was no big deal. Even though he'd never before shopped at Lester's. Even though his mother had only ever taken him clothes shopping at a discount outlet at Borough Park. Even though Lester's, like Caraville and Deal and the casino, was essentially the exclusive property of Syrians, and Ashkenazi Jews like him had no real claim on it. Lester's was, in fact, the height of Syrian glamour. Everyone wanted the cachet that came with carrying their signature yellow and black plastic bag. The store existed in a particularly dilapidated and unsavory stretch of Coney Island Avenue, across the street from what was once a porn theater and was now a McDonald's. But amid this gray wasteland, Lester's grew into a mini empire, ultimately usurping an L-shaped piece of real estate that extended all the way around the block. It became a haven for SYs. The clothes were chic, and it was well known that Syrians didn't have to pay tax. But even with the tax break, Lester's was one of the places my mother couldn't afford. Or if she could, I was asked to skim from the ugly piles of sale clothes from the boys and Husky section, and she would try to convince me how great I looked in bad outfits. If I balked, she'd guilt me into liking things. There's nothing wrong with that shirt. If I vetoed a pair of pants, she'd override me and ask practical questions like, does it fit you in the tushy? On every car ride home, I'd feel sick, knowing I would be made to wear more unstylish clothes. I had no control over what I wore and how I looked. My clothes were shitty. My shoes were ugly. I was sent to school in wrinkled flannels and corduroys worn to nubs. I was roundly criticized by my classmates for my awful sense of style. I was asked why I dressed like poverty and condemned for not owning sweaters. I couldn't participate in the Izod polo wars, an internecine fashion battle that erupted in my homeroom class, and was exempted from all considerations of wealth and pomp. My lack of control over my appearance and the reactions it garnered had become a near constant source of anxiety. I couldn't hide, and I didn't belong anywhere. And now Howie could shop at Lester's and supersede me, and he wasn't even Syrian. It wasn't his heritage, it was mine. And though I wanted to reject it, once he embraced it, I felt blindsided. I felt I was being robbed of something, like I'd been mugged.
Thank you so much. I have my book next to me on my
yes.
desk. David, it's such a beautiful book. And, it's so honest. It's so articulate. It's so, you just keep burrowing in on this question of your self-identity. And I just found it to be an utterly compelling read in a lifetime of compelling reads. I've read all of your plays, David, and I used to work in a theater in Seattle called The Empty Space, and we produced one of David's first earlier plays called Strange Attractors. And so I feel like from that moment, I've read all of your work in different drafts, and I read different drafts of this book as well. And David, I feel like from the very first, actually that's not true. The first play of yours I read, I think was called Woody Allen's Fall Project. And I think it was at the Iowa Writers Workshop. And I remember even as far back as that, I found that your writing just crashes off of the page. And it's like the writing is like packed with TNT or something. And it was clear to me in reading Lot 6 that quality carries over into your prose work as well. Can you speak to the moment in your career, your artistic trajectory, where you first felt drawn to write plays rather than prose? Because clearly you can do both.
Yeah, but I didn't know I could do any of it. I mean, I just was like a little bit of a tabula rasa And I mean, in the book, it makes it clear, like, I wasn't necessarily raised to be a writer. My parents, in fact, actively discouraged me from writing, even though I sort of had mixed messages from my mom at times. But I think that, you know, I was fortunate in the sense that, first of all, I'm so excited to be here with you and Marin, like my two people. I love you both so much. But I was fortunate to grow up in New York. So even though the community that I'm from is quite insular and conservative and not super arts minded, we were just right across the bridge. So I could get into the city. And my mom, fortunately for me, liked being in Manhattan, liked going to cultural events, and loved the theater a lot. And so she raised me with this intent to cultivate this love of the theater in me, which is kind of a weird thing if you're not from New York, maybe. But I guess for New Yorkers, it was more of a thing. And like theater now, there's a lot of tourists that stay online at the TKTS booth and go see plays. But when I was a kid, it was all native New Yorkers going to see plays. It wasn't as much of a tourist thing because New York was slightly shambolic and falling apart. And, you know, so it was just a cool thing that we got to do. And I think that's when the seed, obviously it had to be planted there. But when I saw the plays, I didn't think, I wanted to be like a tap dancer. I didn't think I want to be a playwright because we weren't seeing, you know, like sophisticated, straight plays. We were seeing really like fizzy Broadway musicals, but I was super into that. And tap dancing was a big thing on Broadway. So I thought, oh, I'm going to do a tap dancing. But I feel like the thing about tap dancing and the thing about playwriting, I tried to like mainline the thing in tap dancing that I loved, which was that it electrified me. And it was a transcendent thing to see people, and it was virtuosic to see people do this tap dancing. I didn't know how they did it. And I thought, oh, it's like a magic trick. And so I tried to, when I was writing plays, maybe it's not even I tried to, it wasn't like, ooh, but I think in my soul, that's what I wanted to give to people. I wanted people to feel like there was something magical happening when they saw one of my plays, like, how is this happening? Because that's how I felt when I saw these spectacular productions when I was a kid. I couldn't believe that it was happening in front of me.
I mean, that is, I remember when we were doing Strange Attractors back in Seattle, we often were talking about like the stage is kind of like a runway. So that really rings true to me, that like, that's the way your plays feel, there's something like pageant-like about your playwriting. But can you speak to the difference between how you adjust your writing style or the process of writing to writing a memoir instead of a play? Because the quality of the writing, there's like a DNA that's obviously the same, but the quality of the writing is different
Right.
in the memoir than in your plays.
Well, my plays are not me. I mean, I think when people see my plays, like I can write about all sorts of people that aren't like me. And people, I think, sometimes mistake my plays for being me, like expressions, direct correlations of, oh, there's David on stage. It's not me. And I thought, oh, if I have this opportunity to write a memoir, I really want to share something much more intimate with myself, even though that's scared me. But that was sort of the project I set for myself. But I couldn't have done it. There is a technology that you need to avail yourself of. I mean, in theater, but also especially if you're writing long form prose. I'd never written long form prose. And I really wanted to communicate a kind of intimacy, but I couldn't do it until I figured out I had to use some of my playwriting techniques. Like I couldn't have done this book had I not been a playwright, because I needed the craft from my playwriting to bring it to bear in the structuring and in the sort of fleshing out of my story, which is actually fiction, right? Because memoirs are all fictionalized because we're curating and we're selecting and we're torquing and we're shaping. And I was very resistant to doing that because I thought, well, I do that in my plays. I'm not going to do this here. This is the space for me to be intimate and honest with my reader. But to cultivate that intimacy, I actually had to use the craft that I learned from writing plays and bring it into the memoir. And that's when my memoir started to work.
And Marin, you've been working with David for years and years. And also I should mention, I've also known Marin for a long time because we went to the same summer camp. Um,
Yes, you were you were the like the cool counselor who was like 2 years older than me or something like that. You were
that's
like,
right. I don't know if I was very cool, but
to me,
I was the
at
counselor.
least.
But you've been working with David also for many, many years and collaborating with him for so long. And there's clearly this innate understanding that you have of how to express his writing and deliver all that's in it. What would you say is specific to performing David's work? What does it ask of you that other texts don't? And what does it give you that other texts don't?
Yeah, my favorite thing about it is that you have to be technically doing the hardest thing you've ever done, and it keeps getting harder the more the play goes on. And then but it doesn't work if you're just a technical whiz. It just falls flat and no one's interested in that, especially not David. That's not what he's interested in. So it has to be like so fully and completely felt. The emotions have to be at the level of a Greek tragedy, but also then delivered to you through the most technically challenging delivery system that you can imagine. So it's definitely a thing that as we've worked together, we've experienced. Like, you could have one of the best actors in the world who either it doesn't really work for them or they just don't like doing it, because it's like telling somebody who might be like an Olympic gold medalist swimmer to do the hurdles, where it's like, that's just not, my body doesn't do that. Like, it doesn't feel good in my body. And like, for me, I am such an intense like perfectionist, and I like to do hard things. I like to do the hardest possible thing I can imagine for myself at any moment, like if it's like the next challenge, the next job or whatever. So the idea of having to try to achieve all of the little shifts in David's writing and to like get all of it, but also to remain in like the most open space possible as an actor, to allow the emotions to be completely free and real, is like my nirvana. Like, I think I feel proudest of like working on David's stuff than anything ever, because it literally feels like an impossible thing to try to do, but that if you can achieve that, you are like humming and vibrating at like the highest possible level. So to achieve something that feels like free and also like virtuosic at the same time, it makes me feel like suddenly like a concert pianist at Carnegie Hall, but I'm like jazzing it out or whatever. It's like I feel like I have a different skill set being able to do David's stuff.
Yeah, but there's also
like
like, but so much of it is innate in you, and that's the weird thing about Marin Ireland, is that she can just, because when I first met you, I mean, I'd met you, but then I saw you act for really the first time in a reading at New Drama This. And you played like 3 different characters and kept switching characters. And I was like, what is happening? And I knew, and I had just finished Marie Antoinette, and I was going to do a workshop of it in Portland. And I said, would you do it? And he said, oh, let me read it. So she read it.
I was like, let me read it. Send it to my agent.
So let me read it. And then we went to Portland.
This was crazy.
And we just read it. I said, let's just read it cold. This will be really bad, because that play is pretty
for like
jagged,
the whole,
crazy.
Everybody else who's there, like at Sundance or whatever.
We just had a reading, right?
I was like, I had read it on the pit, but I was just like, I don't know how I'm supposed to do this, because it was so scored. I'd never had to do something where it's like, and then these words are like tacked together with like dashes, and then this part's in italics, and this part's in parentheses, and it's in caps, and like, how do I?
And I gave her no notes. Nobody gave anybody notes. We just let's just see, and it'll be really bad, and that's fine. I don't care. We'll just have a process. And she read it in a way that was literally like note perfect in my head, like how I heard it in my head when I wrote it. So there was something intuitive, even though, yes, when you build the performance and you have to do it like a zillion times a week, you have to have a thing behind it. But intuitively, there's something about your sensibility that just resonates a lot with my writing. So I feel that's very rare. That's a very rare thing.
Well, that seems like a pretty good segue into reading the next section of the book. So this is a section. If David were here, he could tell you himself. This is a section from later in the book, and I will now disappear again.
Bye.
Bye.
Ready, David? Should we just read it? Yeah. This is from a section called Galaxy.
My mother's primary aim in life was to become relaxed. She often spoke about being relaxed, when she might be relaxed, whether you were or weren't relaxed. She wasn't a hedonist. She wasn't a pleasure seeker. Pleasure was too full. She was after the skeleton characteristic, pleasure without content, beyond calm, divorced from any stimulus. When she was in the process of achieving said relaxation, my mother would narrate in running commentary its various phases, registering like a Geiger counter any shifts in her arousal.
I feel less nervous now.
She'd say, or
I'm nervous.
or
I'm feeling more relaxed.
at times, she seemed almost surprised that it was even possible to get to the place of calm she'd arrived at. To reinforce her sense of certainty, she liked to repeat how relaxed she was and ask rhetorically of others,
Isn't this relaxing?
and
Aren't you relaxed?
with the hope of generating a sort of feedback loop of homeostasis. The flip side to my mother's obsession with relaxation was her encumbering nervousness, and only cigarettes could subdue it. When I was little, I viewed her addiction as a steely resolve, an unrepentant individualism that cared nothing for social trends or ghastly images on posters of tar-rotted lungs. In truth, she was just addicted to cigarettes. She tried to quit smoking when it became fashionable in the late 80s, the first of several crusades. But at the slightest skirmish, the slightest hint of a problem, she was back off the wagon. My siblings and I staged interventions. We threw out the cartons of Benson and Hedges ultralight 100s she hid in her drawer, but she'd just get new cartons and find new hiding spots. We made vociferous complaints. We warned her she'd get cancer, but nothing worked. Then, just before she turned 60, she was diagnosed with something called an acoustic neuroma, a tumor lodged between her brain and acoustic nerve. The tumor was benign, but still potentially life-threatening, and she needed to get an operation. The doctors insisted she quit smoking prior to the surgery, and we were all shocked when she was able to do it, particularly in light of how nervous she was about having brain surgery. After her recovery, she tried to make it stick, but there was a problem, which was that when she was nervous, all she knew how to do, if she denied herself a cigarette, was torment herself with nervous anxiety. In the skein of her unpleasant thoughts, and as an intermediary respite from the horrors she conjured in her overactive mind, my mother decided to book a luxury cruise to the Caribbean with my sister. There were only 2 beds in the cabin, but for a couple $100, she said I could join them. There was some kind of pull-out sofa or trundle bed. I flew into San Juan, where I met up with Mom and Arlene. The ship was nice, but the cabin was significantly tinier than I imagined. It barely fit the 3 of us. Arlene already seemed to be anticipating the bad time we'd all have in the small cabin, but my mother was in a roughing it mode. We'd hardly be in the cabin with all our activities and sunning and dining and relaxing. While the surgery was deemed a success, the healing process was going to take a bit, and my mother was almost entirely deaf in her right ear. The deafness caused her to shout at everyone, but she didn't think she was shouting because she couldn't hear herself. As we unpacked, she loudly lectured me about sunscreens and warned me about the dangers of the Caribbean sun, explaining that it was
not like the sun you think you know,
and that it could
burn you alive.
The other residual effect of the surgery was that it left her with a constant sensation of imbalance. Every so often, she'd lean cautiously, her fingertips grazing a wall or a piece of furniture to steady herself. Or she'd become oddly still, then slowly hold out her hands with her palms facing out as though she might do a pirouette. She'd look over to one of us and inquire,
"Are we moving?"
in a loud monotone. Her eyes were sweetly uncomprehending, her feet planted unsteadily like a child just learning to walk. We got all dressed up that first night to go to the Orion dining room. Mom lurched unsteadily down the port hallway. If she lost her equilibrium, one of us grabbed her arm to steady her.
"Are there waves?"
she said on the elevator, prompting looks from the other passengers. "Ma, you're being loud," Arlene whispered. She wobbled a little to the left, then pressed her fingertips against the wall of the elevator as though performing a sacrament.
"I feel movement,"
she said. "Ma," repeated my sister, "you're being very loud."
"I'm loud?"
"Ma, you're screaming," I said.
"I'm not screaming."
The elevator doors opened and I walked ahead of my mother, who wobbled down the port hallway, navigating turbulence, both real and imagined. She careened through the maze of tables in the dining room, which was huge. It took a long time to get anywhere. It was decorated in shades of gold and cerulean. On the center of the ceiling was a polar projection world map, a token reference to the name of the ship, I supposed, which was the Galaxy. Even if the world was not the galaxy, the motifs on the ship in general seemed confused. The maitre d' seated us at a table near the galley. We had to share it with a squat Midwestern couple and their daughter. The father wore tweeds. He was bearded and had an owlish face. The daughter, like her mother, wore lace-fringed Laura Ashley. Her dress had a ribbon near the sleeve and a deep border of embroidery.
So where are you from?
Screamed my mother quite suddenly, as though she was broadcasting into a loudspeaker. Her volume made the father's chalk-white face turn scarlet. Minnesota, he said.
You like it there?
Oh yeah, it's nice, the wife said.
I just had brain surgery.
My mother said, not to anyone in particular.
I had something called an acoustic neuroma.
Ma, Arlene chided. They don't want to hear about your acoustic neuroma. Arlene eyed the family, half in complicity with them. Like my sister, I tried to give subtle nonverbal clues to the Midwestern family that I was in solidarity with them, that I too was mortified by the loud, overbearing presence of our mother, who didn't appear to notice our discomfiture, or if she did, she didn't care. She was going to be sociable and have a good time. Our table was near the silverware station, and for some reason, my mother, who was otherwise mainly deaf, was acoustically extremely sensitive to the sounds of tines and spoons and all manner of silverware, a point she needed to emphasize with absolute clarity every couple of minutes by declaiming things like,
"It's so damn loud!"
and
Shut up with those forks already!
When our waiter refilled my mother's wine glass, she became inexplicably livid and demanded he pour the wine back into the bottle because she hadn't asked him to pour the wine into the glass, and as part of her extensive reprimand, demanded that this one bottle of Pinot Grigio be kept for her in the back, and that at every dinner thereafter, the waiter was to pour her
1 glass per night.
By the time dessert came, I had a migraine, and my sister had gotten so anxious she was unconsciously pulling the kinks in her hair and ripping at her eyebrows. I felt badly for the Midwestern family, who'd collectively sunk into a quiet capitulation. They tensely sipped their ice water, careful not to clink the ice or touch their silverware or do anything that would incur further umbrage from my mother. When we got back to the cabin, I took 2 Advil, put in my earplugs, and went right to bed. But I couldn't sleep. I lay in my trundle bed all night, planning my escape.
I could do that for weeks. I have to say, I could just stay up all night and do this.
Read.
This is how I want to do every reading.
I could do the whole book
Like my mother.
right now. We could just stay up all night and do the entire book.
Yeah.
This is my fantasy, because what writer wants to perform their book? Like, I just want to have someone else do it. That was always my fantasy. I always had this in my head.
So that was a terrific reading. I look forward to everyone everyone seeing it. If people are just watching the video, we had a technical glitch. We went away and then we came back, and everything's
The vengeance.
with a vengeance.
Yeah.
Now everything is
Yeah.
different, and we're all really weird. So okay, so I haven't really formed this question out very well, but like a thing that like thinking about the memoir, a thing that boggles my mind is just the sheer task of doing it. A book asks, like a play, asks for an organizing principle. And for a memoir, that organizing principle is your life. And like, when I think about the task of doing it, like I don't think that I would have any idea what the organizing principle is of my life, or more than that, like how I would go about choosing which episodes to include to direct the story of my life towards what that organizing principle is. I'm basically trying to ask, like, how come I'm not in the book? No, just kidding. No, but like, what was it like to carve into that? You know, you set out to write a memoir, and you had to choose, like, what was the thing that you're driving for, and how do you choose which memories? What was it like to choose which memories to prioritize over others?
Well, I mean, it was kind of a harrowing thing. To start with, what I was contracted to do is write a book of essays. like almost like intellectual essays for HarperCollins. And I would write a little bit about my life, but basically I'd be writing about art and artists and writers and philosophers and people that who influenced me. And I thought this is going to be, you know, the organizing principle. I'll do like pick one philosopher, one work of art, one this, one that, and then somehow it'll weave thematically into something about me. But I started doing that and I was like, this isn't really working. Like, this isn't really, there's no skin in the game. I'm actually like just writing about, you know, Kafka, or I'm writing about whoever. And so I thought, okay, that stuff can be in the book, but I have to change it, because the more I was writing, the more I realized like, oh wait, there's something that in me that needs to come out, and I am blocking it. And this is sort of typical for me, because I often don't know what I'm writing about in the beginning because I'm scared. And so the fear sort of like clouds it, and then I'm happy to be in the cloud, because then I can write in a cloud and not know that what I'm doing. And then the cloud lifts and I'm like, oh God, what the hell did I just do? You know, what did I just reveal? But it's the only way I can really come to grips with what the truth of what I have to write. So what I did was I started it as this book of essays, and then I had to radically peel all of that away. So you know, I was doing two things when I was doing the essays. I was writing these intellectual essays, and then I was writing memories, or these like signal moments in my life, without really totally understanding what I was doing. And then when I realized I had to change it and make it more conventional memoir, I looked at the signal moments and I thought, well, what's tying this together? And I thought, well, this has to do with identity and the creation of identity. It's a metaphysical book. It's a Bildungsroman. It's a Künstlerroman, which is a book about becoming an artist. I wasn't totally sure about that, but I think that that's what this is. And so it was very loosey-goosey. And it spanned many, many years. It wasn't focused. Most people, when they write a memoir, it's a thin slice of something. It's like, oh, you know, my drug problem, oh, my alcohol problem, oh, my this, my war, you know, my war trauma, my this, my that. I didn't have, you know, my problems felt so hard to pin down. And the thing that I wanted to write about was so evasive in a certain way, and so sort of resistant to easy articulation, that I couldn't quite do that. I just didn't know how to make the thin slice. So I just thought, I'm just going to write it all, and I'm just going to sort of reverse outline what I wrote and see if there's a structure in it. Like, what is the organic, like if it's like a coral reef or something, like if it's an organism, what is the organism? And if it's an elephant, I'll put a tail here and a trunk here. Okay, now it's an elephant. And so, but that was like a very hard thing. It wasn't like a play where you could just do that. I do that a lot in my plays because I don't like to impose things. But this was harder because it's like hundreds and hundreds of pages, and it's all, there's no white space in a play. It's like all white space. I was just not prepared for the sheer volume of like the work that I had made for myself. So it was a process.
And when you mentioned that first you were commissioned to write a series of essays, what was the origin of that? Had you expressed an interest? Was that just based on HarperCollins seeing Stunning, or?
It's all very mysterious. Yeah, they saw Stunning. My editor, who was like left HarperCollins, but it was Jonathan Burnham, who is the CEO now of HarperCollins, who was at the time the executive editor, and my editor, who they both saw my play. They read an article about me in the paper, and they said, you should write a book. It was very weird. To this day, I don't totally understand what happened. And, you know, maybe like if I had not agreed to do this, I would, you know, be living in a mansion and have made all my big bucks. But I didn't do that. I decided, no, I have to write this book, even though I don't write prose and I don't know what I'm doing, but why not? I thought it would be a lot easier. I really, really did. I don't know. I just don't understand how it all happened. I posed it sort of, I just said I have nothing really to say. I remember the meeting with Jonathan Burnham in his office and with this editor. And I just said, like, listen, sounds good. I just don't have anything. My life isn't about anything. I have nothing to say. And I don't want to be one of these like memoirs who in his 30s, like who's going to write I don't want to do that. And they said, no, it could be this, it could be that. And then I thought, like, I don't know, there was something very sexy to me about writing a book of intellectual essay. I just thought like, ooh, you know, this will be like a different side of me. Like, people don't know that I have all these, you know, deep intellectual things. So this will be great. Everyone will be so impressed. They'll know finally I'm not just, I don't only write about Three's Company. I know things. And, but then it got all whittled down. I couldn't do that. But I don't know why they asked me. It's a real mystery. I never had the guts to ask them, because I just thought, like, I don't want to even, like, I don't want to mention the elephant in the room because they'll take it away from me, and so I never asked them.
That's amazing. And Marin, you've been part of David's life and work so intimately over the years. Was when you read the book the first time, what surprised you about it when you read it?
Oh God, I remember calling David after I'd read the first 50 pages. I was so sad because I felt like I was so close to him for so long, and I thought I would know every single thing in the book. Like we've talked about so much of both of our pasts and our growing up, and we know each other so intimately. And I was just like, I can't believe there's any moments of pain that I didn't know about. Like I felt like I wanted to go and protect little David in the book. And I felt very protective of him. And so that was just a surprising thing that I experienced, that I felt like I would be able to just like read a person's book and be like a normal person about it. But I had like a very emotional reaction to it. I do have to say that it reads to me it's part of why I like reading it out loud, because it's like I hear the book so well in my mind. It's so beautifully made in that way. But we talked a lot during the process of it, and I think that all of the steps, the way you like taught yourself a new art form, David, like that, it was real work that like you did on this project. You like took this thing and you taught yourself a whole new art form for yourself, and that is astonishing to me, and thinking about where the different levels and the different phases it's gone through. So I think like I'm just shocked that like every time I don't know, the whole thing is magic to me that you created this thing out of yourself, but it still is like but I hear it so clearly. I hear all the people, and I hear the tone of it and the rhythm of it. That's all so David to me, that like it's out loud for me,
Yeah. That was like I had a similar experience too. When I was reading it, I had that same feeling at the beginning of saying like, wow, I thought that I knew, there was so much that I just thought I knew. I thought I was going to be able to recognize it and all of that. But then I was also saying like, oh, there's so much about like David that I haven't really understood. And then I felt like I had access to suddenly in ways that I did that were surprising to me and really moving. The honesty.
It's weird because I'm such a private person. It's not like my jam to be like, I'm not an exhibitionist. Like I wasn't on social media before this. I have an Instagram thing now because they told me to do it. But I'm not somebody who thinks I got to tell myself, I got to show all these things. So I am private in a lot of ways. But the ethics behind writing is always going to be the same, which is to tell the absolute truth and to go marrow deep into the subject matter. So it's like I had practiced doing that with my plays, and I know what that feels like. So then when I had to turn the mirror back on myself, I knew what it felt like when I was being evasive. And so it was and also the writing is really bad when you lie in a memoir. Like the writing just gets hoary. It's unbelievable how bad it is. And I was like, you can just tell when you're not telling the truth. But it is a very strange thing I'm somebody, and you know this about me, like I hide in previews. Like I don't want people to see me. I get very self-conscious when people relate my play to me or turn to me and see me at the theater. I'm just hyper nervous about stuff like that. So to do something like this feels very radical, and it's kind of a mysterious thing about how I ended up doing it. It's just a very strange thing.
Was there any, like when were there major surprises to you in writing the book that you suddenly said like, oh, now it's that kind of book? Or did it change direction? Was there a point where it became a different thing than you thought you were doing?
Yeah, I mean, I thought like I had written long essays about Preston Sturges films and like stuff like that. So that's now like maybe up 3 paragraphs in the book. Yes, there were whole things that I had to just throw right out that I'd worked on for years. The shape started to become more available to me the more I sort of followed the clues, like the breadcrumbs that I left for myself in certain sections. And I went, oh yeah, there's he here, there's he here, this makes sense, this links to this. It's sort of like doing like kind of like a, one of those games, those where you link things together and you go, oh, well, that links to that, but this links here. And so it started to materialize. And when it didn't, when something wasn't working, it was like doing a big elaborate puzzle. It was like doing a crossword puzzle. That's what it felt like doing this book, but a really big one, like a mural size crossword puzzle.
Right.
So I was surprised constantly, but I knew if there's a gap here, it's like, okay, well, what is this gap? It has to intersect with this and this. And so you eventually sort of, yes, I go, oh, I know what it has to be. I know what this has to be. I know what has to be here. And those gaps, the lacunae, were very interesting because often there was stuff that I just didn't want to talk about. And I thought it was stupid or not important or no one would want to know. And those are like the keys to the book.
Yeah. I have a question from Wen. In regards to memoir writing, what is the line between what you can and what you should not share?
To me, there is no, I wish I knew. It's a very vague thing. I feel very uncomfortable in the end with that stuff. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I think what I decided in the end was I have to tell the truth and I'm here to bear witness. And like this memoir is testimony to my experience in terms of how I crafted an identity and a self coming from very difficult circumstances and became an artist. So I thought, okay, I am here to give my testimony to that. And I have to tell the absolute truth. But if there's stuff that's kind of like exiguous or like things, for me, it was more things that would hurt someone on a soul level. Like if there was something that would damage you, not your ego, not your pride, but if it was something that was spiritually damaging to somebody and it would hurt them that deeply, I took it out. And there's nothing in there. There were two things that I took out, and it was me being nasty or something. There was like a nasty streak that I had sometimes, and I had to take that stuff out. And it was like sometimes in the beginning, especially, it was like the memoir was just all about me like getting revenge. Like every memory was a memory of revenge. Like, see, you thought you could do this to me, but I'm gonna write this book, and now everyone's gonna know, and then it's all bad writing, and you cut it out. But there was some caustic stuff that I wrote that was good writing, but I still cut it out. I had to do it.
I have another question. This one's from Winter Miller.
Hi, Winter.
Hi,
Winter. Part of a successful memoir, I'm told, is being able to present yourself in an unflattering light. I happen to think you're a peach, but how did you go about looking for your own flaws? I mean, practically, what strategies did you employ to drop your ego and send it out for ice cream? Or how did you frame questions to yourself?
It's a really good question. I can't totally explain how I do that, but I don't have a huge ego. And I think I am pretty empathic. I read this book by Vivian Gornick called The Situation and the Story. And one of the things that she said was the first thing I read before I started the memoir. And she said, you have to this is when I was doing my early notes and I was making all of my, everyone look really bad and I was getting revenge on them. And she said, you have to really, when you write a book, you need to like make your, the people that you're, your enemies or whatever, as heroic as possible and really tease out as much bad stuff about yourself. I mean, she says it in a more sophisticated way, but it was sort of like, I knew like there's stuff that I felt guilty about. Like, I'm not somebody who just sails through my life and just goes, oh yeah, like I always know like if something makes me slightly ashamed or if there's moral ambiguity around stuff that I'm doing. So, so there's that. There's just me and my compass as a person, right? So I'm not a sociopath. And then also, it was craftsmanship, right? So if you look at a scene and you're building characters with nuance, when you turn yourself into a character, you have to give yourself that same nuance. And it just makes it makes the work better. It makes the writing better. So for me, in the end, it all became about like, is this good writing or not? Is this character an interesting character? And so I had to, at some point, start turning it into like a play. where it was just, I had to just make myself a character, and now he's over here, and I have to be brutal with my character. Brutal in the sense that I'm doing surgery on him, like the way I do surgery on everyone. And you're just going as deeply as you can into everybody, try to figure out what's making them tick.
That's amazing. Here's a question from Esther Mizraki. Esther asks, I'm wondering how in touch you are with your SY family and the community in general. I too am a writer, and I left the community years ago. Other than my 96-year-old dad, I'm not in touch with any community members, which feels sad sometimes, but it feels like I live in a different world now, one they would never accept or even try to understand. Is your experience similar?
It is similar. I think that I'm not one to be pushed into things. And I think that there was just a lot of stuff growing up in this small community. There was just a lot of conformity demanded of me. And I couldn't be that way because, I mean, this is what the book is sort of about. Like, I'm just a weirdo. I'm a weirdo in the world. I'm also gay. Like, I'm weird in so many ways. And I try, and I was so desperate to be part of this community because it presented itself as like the most amazing thing. I mean, everyone just was gorgeous. I mean, Syrian Jews are very hot, and if they dress really well, they live in these great houses. The food is good. I mean, the surfaces are incredible. And I was like, oh, if only, it's like, if only I could be part of this. And then I couldn't, like, there were so many obstacles to my fully engaging with this thing. And I just didn't have the goods to be a part of it. And in the end, I think I realized, and I don't know if you feel this way, Esther, but I feel like I'm so happy that I was so tortured by that. I mean, not that I was tortured by it, but that being tortured by that forced me to create my own path and cobble it together by hand. And that's why my life is so meaningful. And I feel like I understand myself very, very well. I feel like I'm very proud of that. I'm happier to have it that way.
And there's sort of a follow-up question from Nick that seems related to the tail end of that answer, which is, do you feel like in having written the memoir, did it help create a better understanding within your community? Do you feel like were there any bridges forged in the writing of the book, or does life carry on?
Life barely carries on, but I mean, as we all know, the one cool thing that came out of this was I was asked to do a reading early on as part of this group of queer Syrian Jews, right? There's like a group of Middle Eastern Jews, and I was very random. They gave me this. They said, "Would you be part of this Zoom?" And I did it. I read from the book, and maybe 20 people showed up. But there's this grassroots thing that did not exist when I was a young boy. I couldn't have imagined such a thing. And people were writing in the comments, like they have comments now, but they were writing things like, "We're so proud of you," and "Yay," or whatever. And I'd never had that before from people in my community. No one ever said they were proud of me. When my play Stunning came out, which is a very, difficult satire of my community, I was really labeled. I'm like, if they had fatwas, they would put one on me. I mean, they don't do that, but like I was like really, persona non grata, and I write a little bit about it in the book. So they're not super gay friendly. It's not a very arts friendly community, or arts centered. So the fact that I had that, and I saw, like, I was like, oh, this actually feels like progress to me. This is incredible. Like, this is what the internet can do. That was a pretty remarkable thing.
I do want to say that I think you, and like the healing that you were able to do on yourself because of the way you had to sort of dramaturg your own past, and really be rigorous in that dramaturgy, is the kind of thing that, we all sort of do if we go to therapy or whatever. But how rigorous dramaturgically you were with your own history, I think is led to.
That's the shocking thing, right?
Feeling.
That's the shocking thing about writing a memoir. It's like when you actually dig into the material and you go, this led to that, that led to this. Again, there's so many lacunae, like, no, it didn't. That did not lead to that. What is this? And so forcing myself to be accountable for what actually happened and when, like, and my behavior and my actions was healing, because it just put the pieces of the puzzle together. Suddenly it's like, oh, this actually makes sense. Like, it's a fiction, but the technology of this fiction has enabled me to understand myself the way art helps me understand life. That's a profound thing.
Well, that's so true of your work. I mean, I always think of your writing as being so brave, in that it is, I don't know, in the way that it actually scares me. Like, it scares me in a way that I think is really enriching. And I mean, all of it, I remember I'm thinking about your play, The Evildoers, suddenly, and the way one character is looking into another's eyes and says, like, I want to see into the molecules of you.
Yeah.
And what he has is that in that moment is that ability to really, like, find the thread that he can pull to completely unravel the person that he's talking to. And it scares the shit out of me when I first read it, because I felt like that is it. Are we so fragile? And of course the answer is yes, but I think it takes great strength and bravery to kind of put yourself on the line to put that into a character in the way that you do. So I guess I just want to say, I know we have to go and eat dinners that our spouses may not be making for us. But I guess for that, I just want to say, like, you know, again and again, David, and also Marin, like, for being such an amazing, like, essayer of David's work, and in all your performances, not even in David's plays, but the bravery and honesty that you put into your performances. The two of you are, you know, you just add more complicatedness and complexity and beauty into this weird experience. And I'm so grateful for you. So thanks so much.
Oh, thanks for this, Adam. This was such a joy.
Love you, Adam.
Love you too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.